Good evening, wherever you're joining us from today. Hello, hello, hello. I have been up multiple times overnight with a lovely little 4.5-month-old. So shout out to anyone else who's in a similar situation. That's always fun, isn't it? But it is so nice to be here. It's day 4 of the challenge. We are more than halfway through, so time is flying. And I hope that you have been finding these calls and these challenges super useful. So let me know in the chat, how did you go yesterday with asking for a discount? Were you told yes? Were you told no? Or were you told maybe? Let me know in the chat how you went with yesterday's challenge. Quick recap for those of you who are just joining us. Yesterday in day 3 of the challenge, we were getting comfortable being uncomfortable. So yesterday was all about asking the question and asking for a discount, which for a lot of us is often quite awkward, right? A lot of us don't like to do it. A lot of us not super comfortable talking about money or asking for what we want. And the reason that we did this exercise yesterday was because we can parlay that into how we ask for what we're worth in the workplace as well. Quick recap, the first day of the challenge, we sent one text, the Goosebumps text, to someone to get some feedback about what they thought our best qualities were. That's on day 1. Day 2, we were tracking our biggest success for the month in the PepTalkHer app. Yesterday, we asked for a discount. Let me know in the chat what you were told. Were you told yes, no, or maybe? I'm interested to hear from you. And today, we're going to be talking about money again. So this is one of my favorite topics. If you've got questions, pop them in the chat and I'm going to get to as many of these as I can. I try and keep these calls to 5 minutes. I inevitably go over time, so sometimes they run a little longer, but just hang around for as long as you can. And if you've got questions, just pop them in the chat for me. I had a message last night from someone who rang the cell phone service provider. They rang their mobile phone company and asked for a discount. They spoke to a manager and they got told no because they were given a discount last year. But I think it was Tyler who sent me the email. She was still really happy that she did it because, yeah, it's all about brain training. So this whole week, the challenge is based in neuropsychology. So we're trying to strengthen our brain. And interestingly, I was on a session yesterday on a virtual conference yesterday, and Serena Williams was speaking. And she talked, interestingly, I didn't even plan this. She was actually talking a lot about brain training. So she talks about, obviously for tennis, you do a lot of training. And she said, a lot of us, we go to the gym, maybe we learn a language to sort of, do a little bit of linguistic training or a little bit of brain training. But she's like, none of us do enough mental gymnastics. None of us do enough brain training to train our psychology to be positive. So she talked a lot about what she learned from her father growing up. He made them stick affirmations a lot of places around the house that said, I am world number 1. I am a champion. I am the best. Things like that. So she was actually doing that from a very young age. And I just wanted to share that with you today because I thought that was quite interesting. And I just heard from her yesterday on this session. So very interesting that even at that top level, she's obviously a top level businesswoman, an athlete. Even at that level, she's thinking as well about how she can train her brain and indeed how she can help to train her daughter's brain as well. So I thought that was really, really interesting. No worries. Aileen forgot to ask for the discount at Target. That's okay. You'll just have to go back to Target tomorrow. Celine was also at the CPA Congress. Yeah. Oh, welcome. Hello. Didn't know that you were there. That's really cool. So yeah, I thought she was really interesting. Let me know, Celine, if there's anything that you took away from that conversation too. Okay, this is really cool. We had a bit of a win yesterday for Ruby, who asked the plumber whether they could get a discount on the invoice. And he gave her more than 10% off, which was a total win. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's all in the way that you ask the question, and it sounds like in Ruby's case, there was a bit of a miscommunication about whether they did or didn't fix the issue entirely anyway. So, asking the question, they might say no. Right. And we talk a lot more in the Career Level Up live program that I run twice a year. And the next one launches in about a week from now. We talk a lot about that in terms of, from a salary perspective, how can you actually ahead of time prepare for the 3 most likely answers in a salary negotiation, right? Yes, no, and maybe, right? Those are the 3 most likely answers that you're going to get. And I know that Claire on the call today is experiencing that in a situation that she's having in the workplace at the moment right now too. So how can you prepare ahead of time for the most likely response that you're going to receive, the yes, no, maybe question? So we spend a bit of time actually in the program talking about how do you navigate around that. Because one of the things that I want you all to be able to do in advance of any of these pay raise conversations, these performance reviews, is to really plan for any roadblocks that might come up. So thinking ahead of time, oh, my performance there hasn't been great. What am I going to say when that inevitably comes up? Or I know the company's not doing very well right now. They're probably going to tell me they don't have enough money. how am I going to handle that so that I can get closer to the answer that I actually want? So I just wanted to share that with you. Okay, so today is all about making it rain money. So let me know if you've already done today's exercise. It's okay if you haven't. I'm going to bring up the link for us if you haven't. Today, I want you to start to think and get excited about what it would mean if you earn more money. So I'm going to pop the link in the chat for y'all. Give me 1 second. And for those of you who are watching the live stream back, it's just peptalkher.com/calculator. So it's pretty easy. So jump on that URL. And basically what the pay raise calculator does is it helps you figure out how much of a pay increase, if you get a 3% pay increase, it will calculate and spit out to you the numbers in terms of what is that going to mean for you every week, money-wise? What does that mean for you every month, money-wise? What does that mean for you annually, cash-wise? And interestingly, what is that actually going to mean for you when you retire? So I know like retirement's maybe not the most exciting thing to think about right now, although I would quite like to retire early. So shout out to anyone who's there with me. So, you might not want to spend a lot of time thinking about retirement, but the reason that that is in the calculator is because when you see the numbers, they're pretty awesome, right? So I can actually go ahead and share my screen. Let's do this together. Okay, I'm going to screen share super quickly. Bear with me. Okay. So, and you're all going to be mortified probably at the number of tabs that I have. But there we go. That's just how I work, for better or worse. Okay. So the pay raise calculator helps us figure out what a pay rise would mean for you, right? So let's say, so here we go. I'm 38. So I'm just going to put that in. I'm just going to use $100,000 because it's easy numbers, right? $100,000. So let's say so I live in New York. Normally I'm actually in Australia right now, but typically I live in New York City. I'm just back visiting family. So in America, inflation is at more than 8%. So I'm going to put in 8% because that's a good number. Any Americans, North Americans listening in today, 8% is sort of the minimum, honestly, that I would want you to get this year. And we'll talk more about strategies to get there during the rest of the challenge. But so I've put in 8%. What is your annual pay period annually? I'm just going to leave that at 0 because it's just easier for now. Crunch the numbers. So if I get an 8% pay raise, that's an extra $667 a month. It's not nothing. Like that's decent. That's like a decent amount. Annually, I'm going to be getting an extra $8,000. Pretty good. That's a lot of cash, right? But this is the figure that I find quite interesting. At retirement, I'll be much more relaxed because I would have more than $216,000 in my retirement savings purely because of the fact that I negotiated an 8% rise now, right? So I'm probably, ideally I'm a few years away from retirement, but realistically, and looking at the averages, I'm probably about 20 plus years away from retirement. So that's what this calculator has kind of, crunched the numbers in the background. So $216,000 extra in my superannuation. That's a lot, right? Like that's a big amount of cash. Like I don't even know, like that's a house deposit. That's like the most outrageous holiday you could think about. Like that's a lot of money in retirement. So the reason that today's challenge is to put those numbers in and have a bit of a play around is because I want you to kind of think about, 8%, maybe it doesn't seem like a heap now, but it actually is, right? If you invest that amount of money, the extra retirement savings that you will have is significant. So what I actually want you to spend 5 minutes doing today, that's it. This is a 5-minute challenge. I just want you to kind of dream about what would it be like to have an extra $660 a month in your salary, take home salary. What would it be like to earn an extra $8,000 a year? Like, what could you do with that? Would you buy a secondhand car? Would you put it aside for your children's college educations? Would you book like an amazing weekend away for 10 of your best friends? Book an amazing Airbnb? I don't know, but I want you to just start to dream about it. Because we know from the way that the brain works, again, we can actually start to activate the reticular activating system in our brain, right? So we can actually start to sort of, maybe we've been thinking about this, about money and savings and investments and possibilities. And when we start to dream and think about that number and put a number, like dollar sign on it, actually put down a tangible number, our mindset and our brain just kind of opens up, right? And it starts to become more possible because we've thought about it, because we've quantified it, and we've started to dream about what would we do with that extra money. And one of the things that we know, if someone's asking, should the pay be net or gross? I typically just do gross because it's easier because, often that's a round number, but it doesn't, there'll be slight variations, but I would just typically do like, what is your what is your number before tax? Just because that's typically what the pay raise would be based on, right? So anytime you're getting a pay increase, it's going to be based on that gross salary that you're earning. So Beatrice would put it into investments. Yeah, like put that extra $8,000 a year into the share market. That's going to compound a hell of a lot, right? So that that'll actually start earning you money if you're getting dividends and growth and stuff like that. So this is actually a really important exercise. And I know you're like, oh, well, it doesn't really matter. But yes, it does matter, because you actually have to start to give your mind the possibility of what you would do with that money. So we know from research that was done by some amazing academics, I believe it was at Harvard University, that actually the way that men and women negotiate is quite different. But what's most different is the way that men and women are treated when we negotiate, when we ask for more, and when we ask for more money in the workplace. And women, we are actually very, very good at negotiating on behalf of other people. Right? So if I had to negotiate on behalf of Tashina or on behalf of Angel or Anjum, I would actually be amazing at that. So we actually collectively, in general terms, are very good at negotiating for others. However, when we have to negotiate for ourselves, often that kind of freaks us out, and we're not necessarily as successful at that as we are at negotiating on behalf of others. And so what we can do is kind of trick our brains again around this, right? So you might look at that calculator figure today. And for anyone who's just joining us, just jump on peptalkher.com/calculator, and you'll be able to plug in some numbers and have a bit of a play around with what an extra pay rise would mean to you, right? But when you start to think about, wow, an extra $8,000, that would actually be very helpful for my children's education fund. Or I could actually pay off my mum's mortgage, and she would just be so much less stressed if I had that extra $8,000 that I could give to her, right? So it doesn't matter. Or maybe you would just feel amazing because you would put $8,000 towards your own investment portfolio or towards amazing weekend away. But the point is that when you can start to think that the money is not just about you, right? Asking for a pay raise is not just about you. You've actually got to think about who else is this going to help. Well, if I invest this money, that's going to help the economy. If I put that into my children's education fund, that's actually really going to support them and their education and their future prospects. So all of a sudden, it's not just about you. It's not just about you getting awkward, finding the courage to ask for a pay increase. It's actually about the impact that that money can have on your family, on your friends, and on the community more broadly. So actually just sort of reframing it can be very helpful as well. And it can actually shift the power dynamic that we take into those conversations. And one of my mentors works at an Ivy League college. And I remember she said to me, this is like, well, I guess 7 years ago, she said to me, Maggie, when I negotiate her professorship salary or whatever, when she negotiates it every few years, instead of saying, this is my salary, I've got to negotiate, she walks in and she says, I'm negotiating on behalf of myself, my husband, my 3 children, my 8 grandchildren, my 4 horses, my 2 dogs, and the next generation of female academics. And then she goes in and has the conversation. Because for her, it's not just about her, right? Like she's like, I have to do this because the next female professor is going to get screwed over if I don't maximize my compensation now. So I actually have a responsibility to do this and to do it very well, right? And so it's very interesting how it can just kind of shift the way that you approach these conversations. And so that's really the purpose of today, is to think about making it rain that extra money in your mind through looking at the numbers on the calculator. Play around with it, put in place a bananas figure. I was actually just reflecting yesterday on some of the testimonials from the last cohort of the Career Level Up program before I went on maternity leave at the start of this year. People were getting like 20% pay raises. It's like 20 grand raises, 30K raises. Someone got a $57,000 package increase because she got a base salary increase plus a commission incentive increase. So it's like, that's a lot of money. So if you're plugging those numbers into the calculator, like 57K extra a year, like that's game-changing money. And we had one student, Meenakshi, she got a pay raise such that she was able to put in a pool for her kids. And so all of a sudden, like when you think about what money can do for you and for others, I don't care what you want to do with your money. I'd love to see you invest it. I think that's exciting. But, if you want to give it away, do it. If you want to spend it on an amazing holiday, do it. But just think about how that will actually impact you and what excitement that will give to you. And also what impact will that have on others around you? And how exciting is that? And can you get excited about that so that then when you think about approaching these conversations, when you think about the fact that, yes, you're going to have to prepare, you're going to have to put in some work ahead of time, to walk into these conversations to put your best foot forward, but it's worth it, right? Because you can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel and you know the impact that that's going to have. So Catherine's asking, what's the retirement age using the calculator? I'm pretty sure it's 65, Catherine. I'll have to go back and check on the back end, but I'm pretty sure it's 55. Okay, so Pamela's asking a great question here. We are officially at like, I always try and keep these snappy for you, but happy to keep going because we've got a lot of questions coming through. So, but if you do one thing today, all I want you to do is just think about what would that, just play around with that calculator. PepTalkHer.com/calculator, have a muck around. What would that extra money mean for you and your family? And just start to think about that, because that'll shift the way that you approach conversations and the way that you kind of feel about having to even think about preparing for these conversations. Okay, so Pamela's asking, what happens if you've been given a pay rise, but it was only CPI, so it was only inflation. So how do you warm the bench, great turn of phrase, to get another increase when you feel like probably the answer would be no? Good question. So there's a bunch of different things that you can do here. So day 2 of the challenge, we thought about like, what was our biggest success at work last month? So I want you to keep thinking about that, preferably every week. I want you to start tracking those successes in the PepTalker app, in a Google Doc, don't care where you do it. I just want you to think about that on the reg, right? I want that to be part of your process, part of your professional process, is tracking your successes. Because then you have data, right? You kind of have the receipts that you can show to kind of illustrate why that is the case. Where the other thing, Pamela, is you would want to understand in market what the rate is in market. There's really never honestly been a better time to negotiate your salary, and to, especially for all of you who are kind of, you know, established in your career and indeed aspirational and looking towards more senior roles, it's the perfect time. Like, even though the economy is a bit weird right now, it's still an employee's market, right? So companies still can't get enough quality talent. And so if you are quality talent, chances are there's a pretty good opportunity to get placed in another role, right? So sneak peek of tomorrow's challenge, shouldn't give it away, but I will. Tomorrow, you're actually going to reach out to someone to start to get a sense of what's going on in market in terms of what opportunities are there, and indeed what money, what dollar signs could be attached to those roles, right? So you want to start to have an understanding of that, because, you know, you might get some feedback that says, whoa, this is like the top of the band, like that's an unbelievable salary, like it's going to be tough to beat that. Doesn't mean you shouldn't change jobs, doesn't mean you can't beat that, but it just means you then have some more information to understand as to whether it would make sense for you to go to market and look for another role, which it probably would, I'm going to assume. Again, we know from the gender pay gap that on average, we're paid 15 to 20% less than white men, and that figure is significantly higher for women of color, right? So chances are you are being underpaid. I've experienced the gender pay gap myself personally in my career. Really sucks. So what you want to basically do is you want to be a top performer firstly, and you want to be tracking those successes so that you've got meat on the bone for when you have that conversation to say, this isn't just me asking for more, I'm not being greedy, this is the reasons why. And we'll talk as well, Pamela, I like to call it like, you know how in American healthcare, there's like open enrollment season, there's like 2 times a year where you can like change insurance plans or whatever. It's kind of the same thing when it comes to salary. There's typically an open for enrollment time. There's typically a time within your business where it makes sense and where it's very appropriate to talk about compensation. So you don't kind of want to get given your inflation figure one day and then, you know, go in and ask again the next day necessarily. You kind of want to be a bit more strategic about that. You can, but we can hash that out in more detail in the 8-week program. But, you know, ideally you want to have a sense of when are they budgeting, when are they expecting this conversation, so that it doesn't come out of the blue for them. A lot of places will have very structured performance review cadences throughout the year. You might have a meeting with your manager once a week, once a month, once a quarter, once a year, or you might work at a company where it's just total mayhem and there is no structure, right? And if that's the case, there are ways that you can actually put in place that structure. And we talk a lot about the FYI only email in the program as well, which is pretty transformational for people in terms of thinking about how can they regularly communicate their success and their value in a way that doesn't come across as awkward or braggy, right? So that's another technique that you want to think about as well, Pamela. This is a really good point. So Mary makes the point, why should we have to justify this and go into depth? Yeah, I 100% agree. Like, we shouldn't have to. Like, I wish that I didn't have a job. I wish that PepTalkHer was a redundant company, 100%. Like, I would like to do myself out of a job, and that's the goal. The reality is, Mary, that we know, as I said, like we're looking at on average 15 to 20% of a pay gap, depending on how you crunch the numbers, and it goes down if you're working full-time, etc. But anyway, regardless, we know that that gap exists, right? And even when you factor in time out of the workforce, even when you factor in the types of jobs that women are more socialized to want to work in, which are typically paid less, even when you factor that in, there's still a gap. And that gap, they reckon, is because of unconscious bias and discrimination. And that's the part that I'm particularly interested in discussing and supporting you with, because we shouldn't have to do this. And again, if pay transparency rules come in, which, you know, the laws are starting to come in slowly but surely around the world, as that happens, as pay bands and transparent pay bands become more likely, there will be less need to negotiate. There are some companies where you can't negotiate, where the offer is the offer is the offer, because they actually don't want to bring extra amounts of unconscious bias and discrimination into the equation, right? So we're going to see more of that, which is awesome. But the United Nations tells us that they're looking at about 99 to 100 years before we close that gap on our own, right? And so I'm just not super happy to just kind of sit around and be like, YOLO, everyone else has got it figured out, we'll just wait. So, you know, unfortunately, it is annoying. We shouldn't have to do this extra labor. You shouldn't have to come to these coaching calls, right? Like this, like it's annoying. You shouldn't have to do that. If we lived in an equitable world, we wouldn't be here. But what I can tell you and what I've seen from running the Career Level Up program since COVID, so what's that? I guess like almost 3 years, 2.5 years. What I can tell you from the couple of hundred students who've already graduated is that it does make a difference, right? And that if you do collect these receipts, that if you do prepare ahead of time, if you do go in with a considered plan for the yes, no, maybe, you actually get results, right? And you actually do see increases when no one else in the company is getting an increase. You actually do see, we've had 3 people get a 6-figure pay increase, which is bananas, you know, and they were probably earning, one of them wasn't earning 200,000 plus, 2 of them were already earning 200,000 plus. One of them was earning 6 figures, but she went to another job and got $100,000 extra in her package. So the reality is that it works, right? And so I just want to share that with you. Like for me, it's all about impact and how can I help support you to be able to put those numbers into that calculator and to see those numbers ticking up and up and up so that you can then make choices. Because it's really exciting for me to see more women having more money, being in control of more wealth and having more financial independence, because it allows us to make choices in our life, in our career, for our families, etc. So, but yes, long story short to say that, yeah, a lot of men don't approach it that way. And the other thing, Mary, is that what we know is that male and female bosses respond differently when women ask. They treat men differently when they ask to how they treat women. And that's a fact, right? That's been researched. I can send you a bunch of articles after this if you like, because I'm a nerd about this stuff. But that's the reality too. So unfortunately, if we walk in and we say, oh, I'd like more money, this is bloody outrage, Jason's on that, and what that, like, this is just bullshit, give me more. Like that actually doesn't really serve us, unfortunately. It shouldn't matter because we know that John and Andy are going to go in and do it that way and they're going to get success, but that doesn't actually work if we identify as female. It doesn't work as well, because of that unconscious bias of the way that leaders are taught to think about when women ask for more money. And that goes back, you know, generations of the way that we're socialized, the way that we're raised as girls, etc. And I won't go into that right now, but there's reasons for that behavior, again, that are logical if you follow the way that society's worked for a long time. But again, if we're trying to sort of, turn a big ship, there's little things that we can do. It takes a long time to turn that ship, but there's little things that we can each do that will actually make an impact. But I agree with you. We shouldn't have to do this. It's so annoying. Okay, so what I'll do is, okay, cool. So I'll post some of these articles in the Facebook group. They're really interesting. And it's interesting. And some of you might be managers in this call, and if you've had experiences, let me know as well. It's frustrating, isn't it? And I talk about this, you'll see this in an email from me this week. Like one of the things was when I found out, back when I was a journalist, when I found out that I was being paid less than the dudes who did the same reporting job as me, I was just like, I thought they'd made a mistake. Like I was so naive back then. I just thought it was an error. Now I know that it happens all the time, even though technically it's illegal to pay people less for doing the same job. It happens all the time. It might have happened to you, And I decided that I had 2 choices. I could be very bitter and angry, which, I definitely lent into that for a bit, or I could do something about it. And so that's when I started to educate myself about this, because previously, like 10 years ago, I was super naive to all of this stuff. I didn't know. And so I'm very blessed now that I have a lot of academics who've researched this their entire career, who kind of share with me their knowledge and help explain it to me so that I can help and support you, right? In the way that we all approach these conversations. There's a couple of good books as well that I'll send you through that are pretty good, that are on the reading list for the Career Level Up program. And I'll share some more info about that on tomorrow's call too. So yes, we could talk about this for hours, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we will meet same time tomorrow for day 5 of the challenge. I already gave you a bit of a sneak peek about that. We're going to have a day off because it's Saturday in America and it'll be Sunday in Asia Pacific. So we'll have that day off and then we'll come back for the finale. So we've got 2 finale sessions. I'm going to run a full hour session, really deep diving into how to get the pay raise that you want. Like, so I'm going to really break it down in terms of the system that I use that I think is super helpful. And I'll outline that framework. I'll talk you through the mistakes that I've seen people make and actually why when you negotiate badly, it can be damaging from an office politics perspective, from sort of like that social capital perspective. So we're going to dive into that as well, because I don't want you to ask in the wrong way, because sometimes that's actually worse than not asking, because you can actually put yourself on the outer, you can put people's noses out of joint. So we're going to talk about those mistakes as well. So we're going to go through that, which will be Tuesday for Asia Pacific, which is Monday for America. I'll send you a calendar invite. And then the next day, we're going to do another finale session. I'm actually going to bring in students who've been through the 8-week Career Level Up program, and they'll actually share with you their experiences. So you can, no holds barred, talk to them about what they learned, whether it worked, whether it didn't work, the successes that they had, and how that kind of played out in a real world perspective, because they've all implemented the system, right, in their job hunt, in their existing jobs, and had pretty legit results, which I'll let them tell you about. But as I say, it's typically, I mean, $5,000 would be the absolute minimum. Often, I don't even know if we've had anyone who got such a small raise. It's typically sort of $8,000 and up. As I said, all the way up to 6 figures before. We've had 3 people get a 6-figure raise before, which is pretty bananas. Got a couple of questions coming through. Oh, this is interesting. So ageism. Ageism, when you have been experienced in your career and also when you're maybe are perceived as being young in your career, that happens a lot. And there's so many interesting things we could talk to about that. So let's talk about that in more detail tomorrow. And good to know, Mary, that you're not alone there. There's quite a few people who've been through that experience as well. So interesting though, when you talk about day rates, and this is what's applicable to freelancers, small business owners, big business owners, employees, you always want to have 3 figures. And we dive into that in a lot more detail in the Career Level Up program, but you actually don't want to just have one figure. So for example, I wouldn't just want to say, well, I want to earn $100,000. That's actually not enough. You actually want to have a figure higher than that and lower than that. And I'll talk to you about why that is and how you calculate that in the course. Because again, it's all about planning for roadblocks. So we're not going to be sideswiped in the conversation. We're not going to be shocked, because we're going to have already prepared for all of those scenarios, best case, worst case scenarios ahead of time. It's helpful for our brain. We get less stressed. We're less likely to blush, or, you know how sometimes people go red when they're nervous, or you stutter, or you just kind of have a brain fart and you freeze. That's less likely to happen if you've done that prep ahead of time too. So we do an entire module on that, honestly. And we'll also talk, Mary, which is probably relevant for you and other people on the course too, about perception. And frankly, how you can, I know like personal branding is a bit naff, and like thought leadership, it's a bit like, oh, really? Isn't everyone talking about that? But we will talk about how it's actually important to be very clear on how you want to be positioned within the business and within the industry, and how you can start to do that now, such that you don't actually have to go out and look for jobs, right? You're actually getting the inbound offers coming to you, because that's such a better position of power, right? Because when you're like, oh, I'm going to turn that down unless it's this figure, or like, well, I'll only do it if I can work 4 days a week, or I'll only do it if it's fully remote. That's being able to negotiate from a position of power. So we're going to talk about that in more detail as well. And yeah, Beatrice, this is a really good point. Like, the job market is tough after 50 years old. It is tough. And I've heard that from several students. We probably have, I reckon, maybe 20% of our students, I'd say, would be over the age of 50. We've had someone in their 60s do the program. She's amazing, Alicia. So hopefully, maybe I'll see if she can come actually on Tuesday. She's not planning to come, but I will reach out to her and see if she can. Let me message her today, because there's some strategies that you can put in place to deal with that too, right? So it's all in perception, the perception of how other people's perceive you, your experience, how you position that. So we can talk about, you know, getting really clear and specific on that. Because, you know, one of the other things, you can Google a lot of this stuff, right? Like, you're all super smart people. You can just get on YouTube and Google salary conversation, or get on Dr. Google. You can Google that. Do you know, like, that's easy. You're all super smart. You can do it. But the thing is that, like, when you're a professional and when you, like, you've got big plans and you've got big visions, like, the basic stuff is not really enough. Like, you kind of already know the basic stuff, and it's not hard for you to learn that. What we teach and what we're all about at PepTalkHer is, like, the nuance, and, like, making sure that you navigate that so that there's actually no damage to your reputation, so that actually the perception of you only goes in one direction, so that you don't get perceived as high maintenance or as a bitch, for example, which is, you know, can happen if we negotiate in the wrong way, which is very damaging. It's not fair. It's not reasonable that is the way people think. When women ask, I'm not excusing that, but we know it happens. Like, let's just be realistic here. And so really what we're teaching is, like, it's quite personalized, you know, and the way that Tashina approaches this versus Beatrice, it has to be different. It has to be different for Mary and Ruby. It has to be different on industry. It has to be different on how in demand you are right now. It has to be different on whether you're earning 100,000 versus 450,000. It's very different, the way that you approach it. And so the reason that we run a live program twice a year for 8 weeks, so we meet every week for 90 minutes for 8 weeks. And the reason that we do that is because actually it's that personalized advice, right? And then it's the Slack channel where you can kind of go back and forth on some of the specifics, and crowdsource some of that info from the other women in the cohort as well. So that's what I see as super valuable from the program itself. Like, the challenge is amazing, and I know that you're all going to get amazing results from that regardless. But then when I look at why is the more in-depth program helpful, it's because it's just, like, really kind of like shining it up. Like, you're kind of like, you know, like really shining up a shiny trophy. I don't know why I've got that analogy in my head, but it's really like putting all the fine tuning in place so that you are a well-oiled machine, so that you go into those conversations truly, so that every negotiation is then just a conversation. It's not a big deal that you're building up in your head. It's a conversation. You're on the front foot. You're operating from a position of power. You feel good, you feel confident, you're not freaked out about what if they ask me this question, because you already know. We will have planned out 90% of what could happen. There's always a bit of unknown, right? But 90% of what can happen, we can plan in advance, I promise you. And people forget that. People think, oh my God, I don't know how am I going to handle this. It's like, well, you can kind of handle it already. Like, I already can teach you ways that you'll be able to feel way more confident. You'll have the right words, you'll have the turns of phrases. We're gonna practice pausing, very important in negotiation. We're gonna have phrases ready to go if we need to buy time, all that kind of stuff, right? Like, it just shifts your whole mentality. And I'm just a nerd and I love all this stuff. So because I just see how impactful it is for people. So that's what we talk about in the 8-week program. So anyway, I'll send you all some more info about that. I will send you through some articles. Keep me posted in the Facebook group with the extra amount of money that you would be taking home monthly, annually, or at retirement. Choose which figure you'd like to share. Share it with us in the Facebook group. If you're not on Facebook, I get it. Just send me an email, because don't forget, you're all collecting points this week as well. So our team tracks everyone who posts on the Facebook group, and you get a point every time when you either post or email or turn up to these live calls, and we collate all of those points. And then in the finale next week, we announce the winners of the prize. So someone's getting a scholarship to the program and someone's getting a one-on-one coaching program with me. So there's 2 scholarships available, and we're going to announce those on the finale call next week. But in the meantime, same time tomorrow for day 5 of the challenge. I already gave you a sneak peek. Won't say too much. But if you've got questions in the meantime, hit me up on Facebook or send me an email. And I want to make sure that we can address as many of those concerns for you as we can. If there's any other questions, pop them through in the chat. Oh my gosh. Yes, Catherine. Isn't this the most annoying thing? Catherine's saying, do you cover how to get around delay tactics? Yeah, you know that. I mean, who hasn't been there? Hands up. Let me know with a yes in the chat if this has happened to you. You ask for a pay increase and HR's like, yeah, we'll get to it. Or your boss is like, yeah, I'm on it. Yeah. And then it's like 6 months, 9 months, 13 months, and you're just like, sorry, what? Then your boss has left. Yeah, everyone's like, yes, correct. So this, Catherine, just so you know, you're not weird. You're not the only person. This happens a lot. And I'm actually going to take you behind the curtain in the program, because there's some tactics that corporates put in place for managers and leadership structures and people who control budget items that actually often incentivizes them to pay you less. So I'll explain why and how you mitigate that in the course. And because I don't want to skim the surface of this, because it's quite a serious point, right? But what I will say, Catherine, is, you need to take control of this. You can't control if they're useless. You can't control if they're obfuscating, not wanting to talk about it. You can't control that. What you can control is the follow-up. What you can control is the manner in which you request a follow-up conversation. What you can control are the calendar invites that you send to put something in the calendar to have that conversation. You can control that. You can control your performance. You can control what job offers do you have coming in. You can control how many times you talk to a recruiter every year. You can control those things, right? So we talk a lot about that in the program. There's a lot in the world we can't control. Can't control the economy. Can't control a boss's personal life. Can't control an executive who puts a hiring freeze and a pay increase freeze. Can't control that. We can't control it. We only can control what we can control. And there's so many tactics. And as I say, one of our students, Sonia, 2 cohorts ago, no one in the business got a raise because of COVID, and she did. It took her, in fairness, it did take her about 7 months to get it, but she got it. I think it was about $27,000 or something like that from memory. I'd have to go back and check. Maybe it was 24, can't remember. Anyway, it was a lot, and no one else got anything. So you can, but it takes persistence. It takes being able to frame it in a way that really works. And that makes everyone feel like they're getting something positive. It's not just you being demanding or expecting more. It's actually about articulating, well, hang on, X, Y, Z, A, B, C. It just all makes sense, right? And that's really the mindset that we're going to talk you through in the program, is like, this is not about what can I get. So we talk about the give, give, get mindset as well, and how we actually want to make sure that it's very easy for the company and for HR or the powers that be to say yes. And so there's a whole process that you can go through. It doesn't take a super long amount of time, that just will position you for success in that way. She was like, next financial year, we'll have this conversation. Let's circle back in the new year. But those things can actually be helpful, to be fair, because every negotiation is really a conversation, and it's a fishing expedition, right? Like, we're trying to get information. If they say next financial year, okay, I'm going to write that down. I'm going to put a calendar reminder the day before the financial year to schedule an email to go the next day or 48 hours later to say, per our conversation for 5 months ago, I'd love to meet this week to discuss the compensation that we had a great discussion about. Love to talk about what that looks like going forward for me in 2023. Open conversation, put it in the calendar. If they reject it, you got to keep putting it in. So yeah, there's ways around it, Catherine. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's not annoying sometimes, because it is. But again, that's something that you can control, right? And we can put in place we just like reminders and things like that to make it as easy as possible for us, which is really going back to the nudge theory. And we talked about that a little bit on day 2 when we were reflecting on what was our biggest success at work in the last month. And the reason it's important to track it in the PepTalkHer app is because we're nudging our mind to remember, oh my gosh, yeah, oh, that's right. Oh, that was so good. I did that project. I got that great feedback from the CFO, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the same thing when we're trying to convince our boss. With like, that idea I said earlier of like, it takes a long time to turn a big ship. So like, asking once turns them to here. Follow up might turn them to here. Follow up. So we're kind of like trying to turn the ship in a way that, as I say, is not going to be damaging. And you might get sick of turning that ship and you might look elsewhere. And we'll talk about how to figure that out when that time should be. But that's something that you can control, and that that a lot of our students have had success with in the past. So great question though. I appreciate it. Awesome. Well, listen, enjoy the rest of your day and your evening. This is always such a delight. I so appreciate you. I know your time's special. You could be doing other things with it. So I hope that you've taken something away today that you can put in practice in your life and in your career. Let me know. Post in the Facebook group, what is your number and what are you going to do with it? Are you going to buy a business class ticket? Are you going to like fix your laundry? My mum's laundry needs fixing. I'm up here visiting her and introducing my 4-month-old to the family. Does your laundry need fixing? I don't know, whatever the case may be. Maybe you want to buy a car, go on a nice holiday. Let me know what you would do with that extra money and how excited you would be about that. And thanks, Mary. That's nice. Very kind. Yeah, we'll talk about that. We also talk in the program actually about compliments. That's one of the things we talk about, is accepting compliments, which can be challenging for a lot of us. The reason we talk about that in a career course is because it goes to the way that other people perceive you. So I won't go on a tangent about that now, because otherwise you'll never shut me up. So I'll be quiet. I appreciate you, Mary. Thank you. Let me know what you're going to do with that extra pay money in your pay packet that you're going to have very, very soon. And we will be back same time tomorrow. Can't wait. See y'all then. Thanks, everyone. Take care.